But the big focus this morning continues to be the 9th BRICS Summit. The official ceremony began in Xiamen in China today. The summit brings together the leaders of the BRICS countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Brazilian President Michel Temer, South Africa's President Jacob Zuma and the Russian President Vladimir Putin are attending that summit. Now, recent nuclear tests by North Korea could be the major talking point of the summit, though, with world leaders condemning the North for its 6th nuclear test. The Chinese President Xi Jinping, at the opening ceremony of the BRICS Summit in Xiamen, called for mutual trust between member countries. Meanwhile, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa also figured in his speech, which was broadly focused on enhancing cooperation between BRICS members. She said that the construction of a tall building starts with a solid foundation.
"金砖国家是世界和平的维护者，国际安全秩序的建设者。今年我们举行安全事务高级代表会议和外长正式会晤，建立常驻多边机构代表定期的磋商机制，召开外交政策磋商、反恐工作组、网络安全工作组、维和事务磋商等会议。这就是要加强国际和地区重大问题上的沟通和协调，汇聚金砖合力。
The opening ceremony of the 3-day BRICS Summit started with the BRICS Business Council on Sunday. A record 1,200 attendees, which included the representatives of nearly 80 Fortune 500 multinationals, gathered for the BRICS Business Forum on Sunday. The BRICS group of emerging economies is expected to oppose trade protectionism during the summit. Now, on Sunday, the Chinese President Xi met his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin late that evening to discuss North Korea's latest nuclear tests. Moscow and Beijing decided to appropriately deal with North Korea on its nuclear program. President Xi also called for a joint effort to promote world peace and development. It was the 4th meeting between the two leaders this year itself. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will begin his official meetings today at the 9th BRICS Summit in Xiamen. Let's give you an idea of the Prime Minister's schedule while he is in China. His visit comes just days after India and China last week ended that standoff in Doklam by withdrawing troops from the area. The two sides, remember, were locked in a face-off after Indian troops stopped the Chinese People's Liberation Army from building a road in the area. Apart from the much-anticipated meeting with the Chinese President, Prime Minister Modi will also be meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. In the afternoon, Prime Minister Modi will meet Brazil's President Michel Temer. I'll take you through the schedule in just a bit, but joining us live on the broadcast is my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who's in the thick of it all. He's in Xiamen bringing us updates. Morning, Ramesh, how are you? Just to set things off, I'm pretty sure that the shadow of North Korea's latest nuclear test is hanging heavy on BRICS proceedings. Am I correct in that assessment?
Indeed, and good morning to you, Aishra, and all the viewers of WION from a sunny Xiamen in China. But that said, dark clouds of North Korean tensions indeed and do hang over the BRICS Summit here this morning in Xiamen. This is the 9th BRICS Summit, and as it turns out, North Korea is likely to dominate the agenda of the talks among all the 5 BRICS countries, and one can expect the BRICS joint statement to articulate the collective or the joint position of all the 5 countries on the issue of diffusing tensions on the Korean Peninsula. But that said, today is the second day of the 3-day BRICS Summit, and today is the operative part, as it were, of the deliberations here. And after the plenary session, in which all 5 leaders will make the opening interventions, there will be other sessions later in the day, including important bilateral meetings among the 5 leaders of the BRICS countries, and also the 5 special invitees to the 9th BRICS Summit here in Xiamen, namely Mexico from South America, we have Tajikistan from Central Asia, Egypt and Guinea from Africa, and also Thailand from Southeast Asia. So there are 5 BRICS members and 5 BRICS plus invitees at this year's summit here in Xiamen.
Right, Ramesh, we'll get down to talking a little bit more about what's being said about those countries that China has invited to the summit. But that in a bit. Also, I mean, in addition to North Korea, there's also that whole question of the India-China Doklam standoff. Now, for audiences both in India and China, it's hardly a distant memory at this point. Last week seems like yesterday. Do you think that's also going to figure prominently as one of the key talking points, if not officially, but unofficially during the summit?
Indeed, very true, Aishra. In fact, many Chinese journalists I'm meeting here over the last couple of days are asking me as to what India expects from that key bilateral between the leaders of India and China, namely Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India and President Xi Jinping of China. Remember, this meeting, the bilateral, happens barely a week after India and China signaled the expeditious disengagement from Doklam. And to my mind, it will be a key important meeting from this year's summit at least. All eyes are on that crucial meeting tomorrow here in Xiamen before the summit concludes. In fact, Prime Minister Modi's engagement with President Xi Jinping will be among his last engagements here before he leaves for Myanmar, or the second and concluding leg of his visit. But that said, it's important because, as I said, it comes soon after the resolution of the Doklam standoff. But challenges do remain, and we are given to understand that it will be India's effort and endeavor to come to some sort of a new mechanism or understanding with China to diffuse such situations, if they indeed happen going forward, as to how to resolve such issues if they do happen, and also a mechanism whereby India and China can sit together and discuss and thrash out issues such as Doklam, if they do happen again. All
right, stay with me, Ramesh. I'm also joined in the studio by WION senior editor Surya Gangadharan. Surya, if I can just ask you, Ramesh mentioning the fact that working on a mechanism to sort of resolve future issues that India and China might end up facing. Do you think that's easier said than done, especially at a multilateral forum such as BRICS?
Well, I think the whole purpose of a bilateral is to look at various bilateral issues where you are having problems. And given the fact that Doklam is, as you mentioned, a recent memory, I'm sure there'll be, because in a sense China has been dealt a double whammy, Doklam has come as a bit of a slap in the face. Then you had the North Koreans doing their bit. So the Chinese will be anxious to know what India is thinking, how come this thing happened and we didn't anticipate, and what's the way forward. And I think India has some ideas as to how to do this. The problem here is there are already existing agreements between India and China, including a border defense cooperation agreement, where there was a commitment by both sides not to tail each other and a whole lot of other things, Clearly that's not working. So why is it not working? And these are the questions to be asked, and we have to figure out from the Chinese what is going on in their mind, what is it that they want.
All right, given what Surya just mentioned for us, Ramesh, also add to that the fact that countries like Brazil and South Africa are dealing with their own political turmoil back home. China's got the North Korea question hanging heavy over its head. Does that sort of add to, the criticism of a forum such as BRICS about the relevance it holds in the year 2017 and looking forward as well?
Very interesting question, Aisha. Remember, this is the 9th BRICS Summit, and BRICS has almost completed 1 decade of its existence. And as Prime Minister Modi said, we're looking to the next decade of BRICS. And to my mind, the agenda of the BRICS Summit, at least here in Xiamen, will be on multilateral issues, regional and global issues, not as much the bilateral component of each country's engagement with the other countries of the world, including among the BRICS nations. So Chinese have made it very clear that, their emphasis would be on multilateralism, not on the bilateral specifics of each relationship it has with all the other 5 BRICS countries. But that said, China and India would like to maintain the relations on even keel going forward. Remember, as Surya said, North Korea is a big issue, especially in the last 24 odd hours, and also in the wake of the Doklam standoff. China is in a bind. It has to take a position one way or another on each of these issues, including North Korea. And we've seen China hedge its bets, as it were, on North Korea. But I think time might be running out for Beijing, and it might be have to, we can articulate the position in the joint statement issued towards the end of the BRICS Summit here in Xiamen, when all 5 BRICS countries are likely to take a position on the way forward, especially on the North Korean issue, among others, such as Syria and the other regional global issues.
Right. And Ramesh, just to continue that whole idea about the kind of questions that China might be battling with right now. Speaking of those BRICS plus countries that you spoke of, now the invitation to 2 African nations this time around has also raised some interesting critiques of China and how it's aggressively perhaps pushing for the inclusion of Africa and members of Africa to be part of this as part of the larger initiative of One Belt, One Road. Have you heard any sort of murmurs around that suggestion as well?
Another very interesting question, Aisha. Remember, I am in Xiamen, China, which, by the way, plays a very strategic key role in President Xi Jinping's One Belt, One Road initiative, or the Belt and Road initiative. Remember, Xiamen leverages a strategic location in Southeast Asia by becoming a nodal center, nodal point, as it were, for connecting Southeast Asia, East Asia, and China with mainland Europe. Remember, there are at least 3 railway services, long-distance railway services, that connect Xiamen with Moscow in Russia, with Almaty in Kazakhstan, and also Hamburg in Germany. So Xiamen is a key location as far as Belt and Road initiative is concerned. But that said, India, remember, has boycotted the OBOR summit held in China earlier this year. And India's position has been that economic connectivity is fine, but it should not come at the expense of a member state's sovereignty or territorial integrity.
Okay, stay with me, Ramesh. Surya, it's so interesting that we're talking about a summit that involves some of these really big countries, emerging economies, countries that are taking a stand on the global front. And yet, when we're talking about this multilateral forum, we can't help but bring up bilateral issues, individual issues of these various countries. And I suppose one has to assume that that is the way forward, no matter what sort of summit we're talking about. When it comes to different countries, there are going to be issues that are going to have to be talked about, and that will hang heavy over any sort of summit. So perhaps BRICS is not different from, let's say, a G10 or a G20 in that way.
Yeah, I think any platform where you can get together with another leader or even neighbor and talk through issues, even if it's only for about 15-20 minutes, I think it's a positive. The key is to keep talking, and that's the only way forward, because frankly, neither India nor China can afford conflict. They don't want one. They have too many other commitments, too many other issues to be dealt with and prioritized. So in that sense, even a place like BRICS, when we can get together with the Chinese president and have a chat with him, I think it's a great platform. And let's not forget that the very fact that the PM has landed up there tells you of the kind of work that has gone in the last couple of months, ever since the Doklam thing blew on our face. So I think it's good, the fact that they are talking.
All right, stay with me, Surya. I just want to remind our viewers that we just had visuals of the President of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, a man who is facing his own host of issues back home, arriving in Xiamen, a strategic location, as Ramesh was mentioning for us right now, not just in terms of the fact that it's hosting the BRICS Summit, but geopolitically speaking as well, an interesting choice of venue. Surya, the other big word that I underlined this morning when I was thinking of our chat was protectionism. Now, that's a growing sort of fear for emerging economies around the world. Is it something that the BRICS nations are going to speak aggressively about and try and remind the world that it's you have to move out of this protectionist attitude, and economies need to stay open if the world is to progress?
I think that word will come out strongly, but there's also the fact that China remains a protected economy in key sectors. We've been having a lot of difficulty in getting some of our software products through, in selling our agricultural produce. So there are issues within BRICS itself, the way our markets are structured, the way we keep out other stuff. And very recently, I think we've announced tariff barriers against certain Chinese products, because we believe they're dumping the stuff.
Aisha, and sorry if I might just interrupt you there, my apologies, but we can see the first visuals of Prime Minister Modi arriving. I can just step out of the frame. We can see Prime Minister Modi arriving at the venue of the BRICS plenary. These are the live visuals coming to you from Xiamen in China, and we are seeing the first live visuals of Prime Minister Modi walking towards his host, President Xi Jinping of China, on the second day of the ongoing BRICS Summit here in Xiamen. Today is the operative part of the summit, and we're seeing these first live visuals coming to you from Xiamen of Prime Minister Modi walking after getting off from his motorcade and walking to the main holding area, as it were, where he will meet with his host and President Xi Jinping of China. It's a long walk, actually, a red carpet walk for Prime Minister Modi and all the other dignitaries attending this 9th BRICS Summit here in China. Remember, Prime Minister Modi landed in Xiamen yesterday at about 8 p.m. local time, that is about 5:30 India time, and since then he's interacted with members of the Indian community here in Xiamen and also other parts of China who had gathered to meet him and greet him at his hotel here in Xiamen. BRICS, as you would remember, comprises 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. And this, by the way, is the venue of the 9th BRICS Summit. This comes to you from the Xiamen Convention Center. This is the aerial view of the venue of the summit here, where all the 5 leaders of BRICS Summit will be gathering under one roof to discuss economic, trade and global issues, such as other political issues such as Syria and North Korea, no doubt. And this year's summit will also see the participation of 5 other countries, special invitees, or BRICS Plus, as China calls it, involving Mexico from South America. We'll have Egypt and Guinea from Africa, and also Tajikistan from Central Asia, and Thailand from Southeast Asia. So there you have it. The stage is set for the 9th BRICS Summit, the plenary, which will begin at any moment now.
Ramesh, I'm sure you're going to have to rush off very soon, but before you do, just couple of as many questions actually as I can pack in before you have to leave. Speaking of that long walk you mentioned,
sure,
of Prime Minister Modi making his way over to President Xi Jinping, and I can't help but bring up symbolism, because so much was made of that handshake that took place on the sidelines of the G20, and this meeting loaded with so much subtext, so many other allusions to what else is going on outside of BRICS. So lots of symbolism, lots of optics on display once again.
Absolutely, Aisha. Text, context and subtext are all important when leaders of India and China meet regularly. This, by the way, is their 3rd meeting this year alone. Remember, they met for the first bilateral on the margins of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO Summit, which was held at Astana in Kazakhstan in the month of June. And that was followed by the informal meeting, the handshake, at Hamburg in Germany between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping on the margins of the G20 summit. This would be their 3rd bilateral here in Xiamen on the margins of the 9th BRICS Summit.
Right. Also, Ramesh, we've got visuals of the Prime Minister once again on our screen, and there's this other important bilateral that is expected to take place, and that is between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin of Russia. And I remember last year at the BRICS Summit in Goa, you and I had a long conversation about the importance of reviving and keeping that relationship between India and Russia very strong. And I suppose, given Russia coming forward and condemning the United States' statement on Islamabad of late, that meeting between these 2 heads of state takes on even more important tones this time around.
Absolutely, very true, Aisha. India and Russia have enjoyed very, long traditional ties, time-tested ties, if you can call it that way. But just as India is diversifying and cementing its relations with other countries, including the US and China for that matter, India-Russia relations are maintaining a steady momentum, as it were. Remember, India and Russia enjoy a very close defense relationship, a defense partnership, including in co-production, co-manufacture and co-development of defense systems. So Russia is a stable and time-tested partner of India in defense technology. But that said, here in Xiamen, one can expect Prime Minister Modi, when he indeed meets with President Putin, to discuss about the way forward in taking India-Russia ties to a whole new level. Remember, they both meet regularly, annually in each other's country for the annual India-Russia Summit. And one can expect the Xiamen deliberations here to set the stage or prepare the ground, as it were, for their subsequent annual summit going forward.
Right. Surya, you know, there's so many overlapping relationships over here. You've got India reaching out to Russia, Russia's relationship with Pakistan, which of course is not present at BRICS, but the shadow hangs over all these deliberations. And I suppose it once again highlights India's growing importance, not just in the Asia region, but on a global standpoint as well, and makes each of these meetings far more important than just what they appear on paper.
In fact, when I see BRICS, I find that there's a lot of geopolitical drifts that are happening. You know, you have China and Russia together,
right,
opposing the US. You have them together on Syria. You have them together on Afghanistan, talking to the Taliban, talking to other groups, which we are not very comfortable with. We find Russia developing a relationship with Pakistan, which we are distinctly uncomfortable with. And we also have to look at the fact that the ties between India and Russia are changing, you know.
Right.
Unfortunately, they've remained state to state. They've not gone beyond that. I think that's where the weakness is.
And do you think, if you had to put it down to what it is that sort of set things in motion in terms of what you're calling a global shift in terms of policy, in terms of the way countries deal with each other, do you think it has anything to do with the new US president? Has that sort of set things in motion, or did all this precede it?
I think President Trump has shaken the pot a bit.
Okay.
He has not acted like any conventional American president. He seems determined to overturn trade agreements, to shake up relations with other countries. Although to begin with, he wanted to build relations with Russia, which was a sensible thing to do. But I think somewhere the deep state in the US has caught up with him. He's now backtracking, and we find relations with Russia again back at that adversarial rather level, which is not good. You know,
Absolutely.
When you look,
and speak of the devil himself, he's on our screens right now. President Putin making his long walk down that red carpet on his way into the holding area, as Ramesh was mentioning for us earlier. Remember, 5 nations leaders gathering in Xiamen in China for the BRICS Summit, the 9th edition of the summit. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, and of course the BRICS Plus countries, as Ramesh mentioned for us, Mexico, Egypt, Guinea, Tajikistan and Thailand also taking part in proceedings this year. Now, the Russian president is the latest to arrive at the Xiamen Convention Center for the plenary session, which is expected to begin shortly. Surya, just speaking of Russia, just last evening there was a long conversation that took place between President Xi and President Putin, given what North Korea did earlier in the morning. The timing is very significant, isn't it? I mean, China is hosting the BRICS Summit. This is a very important, face-saving sort of summit for them, especially given what happened at Doklam. And for North Korea to decide to, detonate that bomb that very same day at the start of the summit, it goes to show that China is receiving heft from an unlikely quarter this time around.
From many quarters, in fact. Even if you look at how President Trump is behaving with the Chinese, he threatened some kind of a trade war, threatened to levy tariffs on their steel imports. And these are a vital export from China. So the Chinese are facing flack from a lot of quarters. North Korea, of course, has hit them very hard. And I think then there's the fact that Doklam also happened.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of uncertainty within China at a time of economic slowdown. So how do they deal with all these issues? And it'll be interesting to see what declaration actually emerges from BRICS.
Right. Ramesh, what exactly is the media making of North Korea's nuclear test, and specifically the Chinese media? We watched with great interest the way the Chinese media covered the Doklam standoff, and it made for interesting reading and viewing, most certainly. But what about North Korea? This is one of China's allies, and they've chosen to detonate that bomb on a very important day for Beijing.
Absolutely, yes. Some timing, right, Aishra? Some impeccable sense of timing from Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. But that said, this is a sixth nuclear test, and the world is not unfamiliar with the goings-on in Pyongyang. But that said, like I said before, the North Korean nuclear test has attracted worldwide attention and condemnation alike. And yesterday, within hours of the nuclear test, we saw especially China surprisingly come out with a reasonable remark, if I can put it that way, not a statement per se, but a reaction, no doubt, as to how it condemns the latest provocation from Pyongyang. But that said, China, as we've been discussing on WION, is in a bind. It's look the other way or turn a blind eye, as it were, to goings on in Pyongyang, and treated with Kim Jong-un with kid gloves, as it were. But that said, there's another parallel here, Aisha. China, when it came to Mongolia, for instance, did not shy away from using trade as a lever to put Mongolia in its place when it decided to invite the Dalai Lama, for instance. In the same case, applying the same logic, China seems to be diffident about issuing a trade embargo on North Korea, and that, to my mind, is very illustrative of China's hedging, as it were, on the issue of North Korea.
Absolutely, and I think it's received a critique from various quarters for the fact that it hasn't called out North Korea very strongly. Let's not forget President Trump in his tweets has been rather condemning of China. But just to remind our visuals, that's the Brazilian President Michel Temer shaking hands there with the host of this year's BRICS Summit, President Xi Jinping of China. I think we're gearing up to see all the world leaders who've gathered in Xiamen getting together. There he is, India's man, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, making his way over. And there's the handshake, Surya. I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about following this one. It's a photo op, most definitely, but also full of optics, full of symbolism. We'll get down to deciphering the handshake in a bit, but there was India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Up next, of course, is Jacob Zuma, South Africa's president, who has just survived. He's been called the cat with 9 lives. He has survived an 8th no-confidence motion back home, and he looks pretty confident there, shaking hands with the president of China, Xi Jinping. So all the leaders gathering. President Putin there of Russia, Vladimir Putin, another very interesting and polarizing figure in global politics today. He's had an interesting couple of months ever since President of the United States, Donald Trump, has taken charge of the White House, and now perhaps a slight moment of confusion there about what happens next. But all the world leaders gathering for a photo opportunity. Those are the leaders of the 5 BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, together in Xiamen for the plenary session of the 3-day summit. There you have it, a show of strength, but lots of rumblings within, Surya. So on the face of it, it looks great. I mean, 5 important men, 3 stand out more so than the other 2 perhaps, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I suppose it's our job to talk about that.
Absolutely. I think there's something in that long walk, you know.
Yes.
It's a great red carpet, but just one person walking down that long carpet, and at the end of it, the Chinese president, you know, waiting there. Perhaps a thing about China's power or some message they're trying to send. I mean,
we could spend a lot of time talking about that.
The Middle Kingdom, you know, I mean, perhaps some of the Middle Kingdom syndrome.
And I think that is part of China's growing influence and its desire to appear as an influential partner in not just politics in Asia, but across the world. Ramesh, make sense of it for us. I'm quite taken by that very long red carpet, and you mentioned it, Surya's mentioned it. I suppose it's a point worthy of talking about. China is standing at the end as one person walking down that long walk making their way over to shake hands with President Xi Jinping. Just goes to show that, there is a lot of symbolism at work over here.
Indeed, Aisha, it was indeed a long walk, longer walk than one would have expected. But that said, it is also symbolic at some level of the long walk that both India and China have to do to get to where they want to be, to leverage their relationship, economic partnership, to reduce their political divergences or differences, and to come to some sort of a modus vivendi or an understanding on how the two countries can cooperate and not compete as much with each other going forward. And that long walk, to my mind, is symbolic of the long walk that both India and China have to undertake if they have to maintain the relations on an even keel and not be taken by surprise by developments such as the Doklam standoff, or even for that matter China's reluctance to support the proposed UN ban on Pakistani terrorist Masood Azhar, or for that matter India's quest for membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And also the third issue of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which runs through territory which India considers as its own territory. And that, to my mind, highlights the divergences that exist between India and China, especially in terms of trade and connectivity, not to mention at the political and strategic level. So a lot of strategic mistrust or distrust needs to be removed if India and China actually need to cooperate and coexist peacefully. In fact, yesterday I was talking to a Chinese academic here in Xiamen, Aisha, and he used the phrase strategic common sense, that both sides need to display a modicum of strategic common sense in order to narrow down the divergences and build on their complementarities if the two countries actually want to develop their respective people and countries and take them on a different trajectory altogether. So to my mind, his argument was, more the trade partnership, more the stakes are in each other's country and economy, less chances of a confrontation building up or tensions building up between India and China.
Absolutely. And strategic distrust, strategic mistrust, Surya, is perhaps the best way to describe even what's going on between the United States and North Korea. And we were talking about this yesterday, about how do countries at the global stage dismantle distrust of that nature. It's colossal when it comes to the US and North Korea, and I suppose it finds an interesting parallel between India and China as well. But really speaking, is it all down to commerce then? Is trade and economy the only way of resolving these outstanding issues?
The Chinese have a saying that businessmen have no borders. And if you look at how the Chinese have gone about even their relationship with India, they've said, keep the border dispute aside, and let's do trade and let's talk to each other. So that has built up other tensions because the deficit is nearly $50 billion.
Right.
And the Chinese continue to have a protected market. They keep Indian exports out. So there are issues there also. At the same time, I think both sides have a commitment to this relationship. The Chinese too, because it's good for them.
Right.
I think we've given them enough indication that there have to be trade correctives.
Right.
And earlier the better.
Okay.
Because otherwise they can, take on a turn that would be positively ugly. We've seen signs of that in India in the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely.